Good morning, YouTube. So I did make it to Kitty's Cocktails before they closed, sort of. Oh, by the way, it's 2:25 in the morning right now. Still Wednesday, November 10th. I forget that bartender's name, but she's probably my favorite of all the bartenders that works there. It's an older woman that's just super friendly and always seems to remember everybody, all the regulars, and what they have. Most of the time I sit down there, I don't even have to tell her what I want. She's just like, she'll ask if she'll ask if I'm getting what I usually get, and have it ready for me before I even before I'm even fully grouped at the bar. So it was great to see her, although the downside, and she looked really bummed when I walked in too to tell me this, but she's like I already closed out the register. I'm like, oh. I said, but it's 10 till, and she's like, well, it's been so dead. And I'm like, no, it's okay, you're good. So can I just get a glass of water and chill for a bit? I walked here, and she's like, no problem. My friend Ruth was actually there, so I got to talk to her for a bit, and that was awesome. And show her the picture of the 8-track recorder that I bought, which I had talked was when I called her yesterday. That's what we had talked about on the phone. I had bought 3. And I think the last video I shot, I mentioned I was going into I mentioned that I was going into Ghettotronics, and that I mentioned I was going into Ghettotronics, and that I was going to have to use all my willpower to not buy anything because I didn't have any money to buy anything. I just needed to make a point to buy a couple of DVI cables so I could take care of the video issue I'm having with my karaoke system. And yeah, I have no willpower when it comes to that, which is kind of ridiculous considering how little money I have. But I saw 3 items and I asked them how much they were, and they were like $5 a piece. 3 items I absolutely could not say no to at $3 a piece. Oh, this is interesting. This is where those those homeless people were hanging out in front of here just a little bit ago. It's the old it was Firestone Automotive Center, and looks like it's going to be soon a AAA auto repair center. Now I actually have a AAA membership, but I don't think my membership covers repair. It just covers towing, and it's saved my ass numerous times. I'm surprised they haven't cut me off for as many times as I've had to tow my pieces of shit. But anyway, I digress. I'm sorry, I can't focus on anything. Hey, look, there's the Colonel. God, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so yeah, when I went there to West Tech Recyclers, aka Ghettotronics, well, speaking of the Colonel, looks like we got homeless people hanging out in front of the KFC. Ooh, those guys are jamming to some good tunes, sounds like. You can hear some trap beats coming from them. Or maybe they're jamming to some not so good tunes. That's my daughter Lily's dentist. Yeah, many times with her waiting in that lobby watching cartoons, waiting for her to get her teeth worked on. By the way, I highly recommend this dental office if you've got young children. Oh, now this is just sad. They've moved all their toys into this room where nobody can play with them, presumably because of COVID. And their waiting room is just absolutely empty. That's sad. That's just really, really sad. Especially considering that, oh well, here's another room full of toys that children can't play with here. That makes me so sad. So sad. Yeah, especially considering that most studies have shown that COVID isn't really spread on surfaces as it was initially thought. And little kids that would play with those kind of toys have such a natural immunity to COVID anyway. But I guess everybody has to look like they're doing something to protect themselves and their customers from the pandemic. Kind of let down because, you know, I really like that dentist. I feel like they have kind of the people they have that work there have a real gift for working with children and calming down children that are scared of getting their teeth worked on, and making children feel comfortable there, and also working well with parents. You know, my experiences with taking Lily there have all been very, very positive. So, that's the old brass rail. Oh, anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, I was talking about the components I bought at Ghettotronics. Yeah. So yeah, 3 items I just absolutely could not say no to for $5 a pop. One was an 8-track recorder. And that's the thing I was talking to Ruth about. I got to show her a picture of it while I was over there at the bar. It's a brand I've never heard of before called Mida, or maybe pronounced Mida, spelled Miida. I might be spelling that wrong. I might be spelling that wrong. Anyway, I'd never heard of the brand before. I posted a picture of it in the 8-track sub on Reddit, and that's a tiny, largely dead subreddit, but there's enough people subscribe to it that pay attention to it that it does get a little bit of action in there, and it's pretty neat. The people that are in there are very much into collecting and keeping the 8-track tape format alive. So it's one I really enjoy, even though it's a really small, semi-dead one. Anyway, I posted a picture of that recorder on there, and somebody was really helpful. Posted a link to about a 3-year-old post in another subreddit, and I forget which one. All right, we got more affordable housing here. Posted another where somebody had got what looks to be pretty much the matching receiver for my 8-track deck. Same brand, same styling. Nice silver-faced, late 70s receiver. Looks to be a pretty damn nice receiver, and somebody had posted it there like 3 years ago. I want to believe it was in Vintage Audio, saying, hey, has anybody ever heard of this? It seems really nice, but I've never heard of it, and I can't seem to find any information about it online. And somebody who's a whole lot better researcher than that person, the person who found that and said they couldn't find anything about it online, posted some fabulous links online to a bunch of, quite a few different ads that were taken out by that particular company advertising their stereo components. And it looks like now Mida is a brand owned by a oh my gosh, I forget what the Japanese word is for it, but there is a Japanese word for corporations that make a large plethora of everything, and market a whole large plethora of everything. Some stuff they don't make; they just put their brand on it and get OEM manufacturers to make it. And I wish I could think of the Japanese name for these type of corporations, but and it's a Japanese, make no mistake, it's a Japanese corporation. The three that most stick in my mind, actually, I'm just thinking as my voices in my head are turning away, going, "Up, here's more, Dan." 4 very notable ones that I can think of that make audio components are Matsushita, which makes audio components under the brands Panasonic, Technics, and National. Mitsubishi, which makes, or at least made, audio components under Mitsubishi. It's been a long time since I've seen a Mitsubishi audio component. And Sony, I don't think I have to explain what Sony is. I would hope I don't have to explain Sony. And Yamaha. And that's Yamaha is a great example because I mean Yamaha makes motorcycles, snowmobiles, musical instruments, and Yamaha is still a pretty major player in the audio component game. And one of my favorite brands of audio components. In fact, I have three Yamaha components hooked up. 3 Yamaha components hooked up in my living room, one of which is in constant use. My home theater receiver in my living room is Yamaha. Absolutely love the thing. It's about a 10-year-old model, but it's a really high-end one from 10 years ago, and it's still very much holding its own. Yeah, no desire to replace that. Love that thing. I do believe I probably own 2 nicer receivers, but at this point I'm just so... that one's just so well integrated in my living room. I don't see me, as long as I'm in that apartment, I don't see me changing that out. The other 2 components, which, to be honest, get very, very little use. I also have a Yamaha cassette deck. It's starting to have some issues, so it might end up getting swapped out soon. And which makes me sad because when it does play right, it sounds really, really good. But it's logic controlled, and sometimes it just does. Sometimes its logic gets very illogical, and the buttons don't do what they're supposed to do, and that's annoying. And sometimes it also has issues maintaining the correct speed. Either plays too slow or plays too fast. And yeah, at some point I'm gonna probably replace that with one that doesn't have those issues. As much as I love the aesthetics of having a cassette deck that is a perfect stylistic match to my receiver. The other component I have is one of my most treasured AV components for many reasons. I mean, one, it solves a problem in my system, even though it's a problem I don't that doesn't its use in my system is very integral, but it doesn't get used much. But actually it solves 2 problems in my system. And the other thing, but I really value it because it solves that problem, and there are some components I hang on to for their historic relevance, and I feel this is one that has some serious historic relevance, and it's a Yamaha. Oh my gosh, I should know the model number right off the top of my head, but I might be saying it wrong. But I think it's a Yamaha DDP 1. Yes, the number 1. Generally the way Yamaha numbers their stuff is the letters kind of indicate what kind of component it is, and then the numbers, they don't go in sequential order as they release them, but they just kind of go up based on quality and successive models. Anyway, that one being 1 is the first component, the first model DDP, and basically what that stands for is digital audio processor, and or actually it's a Dolby Digital processor, and that's all it does. Now granted, my receiver also decodes Dolby Digital, but what that decodes that my receiver doesn't decode, because my receiver is I believe a 2010 or a 2011 model, it decodes what's called AC-3 RF output signal from a LaserDisc player. And I don't know if I've mentioned it much on my blog, but I do have an extensive collection of LaserDiscs. I've been collecting LaserDiscs since 1991, and I couldn't tell you offhand what year LaserDiscs first were capable of doing Dolby Digital. It's definitely after 91. I want to say, that vandalism makes me sad. I want to say probably 95-ish. Don't quote me on that. Google it, find out for certain. But more or less 95. There was when they added Dolby Digital to LaserDiscs and LaserDisc players. Now, granted, not all players and not all discs, but they did it with a very unique. There's no other format that's incorporated Dolby Digital the way the LaserDisc did it. And what they did was, instead of using the digital audio portion of the disc, because at that time they wanted to maintain, with the disc coming out, they wanted to maintain backwards compatibility with existing systems. At that point, digital audio had been part of LaserDisc since, I want to say about 86-ish. So at this point, we're talking almost a decade of LaserDisc coming out with digital audio. And the digital audio specs on LaserDiscs being exactly identical to compact disc. So 44K samples, PCM audio, 44K samples, 16-bit 44K, with many players having the ability to pass that digital signal directly out, either via Toslink or a coaxial digital to a receiver. And in most of those digital stereo soundtracks containing Matrix Dolby Pro Logic surround. And those soundtracks sound phenomenal. So, go back to the high-end video market of 1995, and you've got a whole lot of people with high-end video systems and collections of discs that's how their players are configured. So, yeah, definitely you didn't want to suddenly have discs coming out that were not compatible with that type of audio. So what they decided to do, the powers that be, I'm thinking most likely Pioneer, decided to do the AC-3, also known as Dolby Digital, 5.1 surround, decided to do it. At that point, there were not a lot of people using analog audio anymore for LaserDiscs. Pretty fair assumption that by the mid 90s, most people that would have upgraded to a LaserDisc player that was playing digital audio and would only fall back to playing the analog audio, which is how all my players are, except for a couple I have in storage, most of them, and everything I use. Only fall back to using analog audio for playing an older disc that predates discs having digital audio on them. So what they decided to do, since that was kind of a legacy form of audio that the average person was not utilizing, is they used one of the analog channels, being the analog stereo. You got a left and a right analog channel on LaserDiscs. They went to using on one of those channels. They would still have, for backwards compatibility purposes, they would still have the soundtrack in analog but mono. So yeah, you could no longer do stereo or Dolby Pro Logic off the analog. Sorry, if you've only got an analog player, you need to hit your setting to just pull off of that one channel on these new discs. And sorry, you got mono. It's time to upgrade your player, dude. And more likely at that point in the 90s, if you were still using an analog audio only player, chances are you didn't have such a great system, and you were just running your sound off the mono speaker on your TV anyway, so no great loss. And then on the other analog channel, once upon a time I used to know off the top of my head whether it was right or left, but I don't recall off the top of my head right now. But anyway, what they started doing on the other analog channel is putting what they called RF, an AC-3 RF signal. And the best way I can explain that is it's back in the days of dial-up connections, when you used a modem to connect to the internet over phone lines. That signal that went between you and your internet service provider was an analog signal. Now, granted, it's a digital signal, it's digital information. You're sending zeros and ones of data and receiving zeros and ones of data, but it's through an analog waveform, which is basically sound. And I'm sure anyone who's old enough to remember using a dial-up connection to the internet remembers what it sounded like if you accidentally picked up the phone while somebody else was connected to the internet, that screeching sound. And basically what that is analog modulated digital. And that is how LaserDisc does Dolby 3. It's an analog signal modulating the Dolby Digital bit stream, and then that's what has to be decoded. I do actually own one player that decodes it, but that is a very uncommon feature to have on the player. The way it was generally done, the way the bulk of my players that support it do it, is they have an RCA jack on the back that says AC-3 RF out, and that signal needs to be fed to a component that can decode that and turn it into 5 channels of analog audio. Some of the highest end audio receivers, specifically ones made by Pioneer, because Pioneer was the one pushing the LaserDisc format at that time, will have that, but those receivers are pretty rare. Most people, what they did is they would get an external, what's called an AC-3 RF modulator. They would decode it. And back to my Yamaha decoder, the DDP-1, that is the very first commercially available, mass-produced and sold. Of course, obviously there were some older units that did it, but these are things that were just, handmade, experimental demonstration units. But the Yamaha DDP-1 was the first one that was ever mass-produced and sold to the public. And so I feel very privileged to own one of those. And speaking of Ghettotronics, that's actually where I found it, at Ghettotronics. And I believe they sold me that for $5 as well. Certainly it's a component that's worth more, but to them that's not really what they do. And they're just happy to get rid of it, and I'm sure they paid nothing for it. It was just a matter of something they picked up. Anyway, so yeah, that component doesn't get a lot of use because I don't spend a lot of time watching my LaserDisc these days, especially considering my current home living situation, which I really don't want to talk about anymore right now. But it is hooked up, and what it does is it decodes that RF modulation, the AC-3 RF signal from my LaserDisc player, decodes it into 5 analog channels, which I feed into my analog component audio input on my modern receiver. And when I play LaserDiscs that feature that kind of audio, I get absolutely stellar 5.1 Dolby Digital optimum. Because I have a component that does it, and it happens to be the first one. And interestingly enough, that unit has two inputs on it. One of which is for the AC-3 RF, which obviously is used by LaserDisc. That's the only, to my knowledge, the only format that ever used that particular type of output for doing Dolby Digital. And then it has an optical input, a Toslake optical input. And I think it also has a coaxial input, come to think of it, which uses the conventional, what has become the conventional way of doing Dolby Digital, which is just sending the Dolby Digital bit stream, sending it digitally. And that's the way, that's the way it's done to this very day, on pretty much every DVD player, and since then, Blu-ray players and HD DVD players, and other types of components, like modern digital TV tuners, streaming boxes, video game systems, what have you. And so wondering, well, what would I need that for when I've got, or obviously my modern Yamaha receiver would be able to do that. And one of the more other bizarre components that I have is I have a D-Theater DVHS VCR. And for those unfamiliar with that format, the best video about that format, hands down, is on a Tech-Moan video. He did a great video on the format. In fact, I'd never heard of it before seeing his video, and at the time I was a lot better off financially than I am now, and I just, oh my lord, that was an eye-opening video. Didn't even know that was a thing, had to have one. And I kept searching on eBay until I found one I could afford, barely. And anyway, what DVHS is the last upgrade and implementation of VHS. Imagine y'all familiar with VHS tapes, VHS videotapes. It was a dominant video format in the United States for years and years and years. That was the last ditch effort at making VHS relevant. And what it does is it puts, instead of having an analog signal on the VHS tape, it puts a digital signal on the VHS tape that is capable of doing high definition up to 1080i video, and also is capable of carrying either a Dolby Digital or, in fact, I think it's capable of carrying both Dolby Digital and a DTS 5.1 digital audio soundtrack. Now, my VCR is not capable my DVHS VCR is not capable of utilizing the DTS. I do believe I own a couple of tapes that have DTS on them, but I can't utilize that bit stream on my VCR. And I'm not going to spend money for a higher end DVHS VCR. In fact, at this point, I'm thinking maybe I should sell my DVHS VCR because I really need some money, and I do actually still own some things of value. But mine does do the Dolby Digital, and it does the Dolby Digital through a Toslink output. So yeah, I'm pretty much I'm utilizing every digital input on that Yamaha receiver for other components that I have. So since that is a digital input that I use digital audio stream that I use very, very little, I've got it wired to the DDP1, and the DDP1 decodes it and then sends the 5 analog channels into the same component video input that I use for my LaserDiscs. And when I watch my DVHS VCR, I switch I've got it directly feeding my TV on the component video input. So I switch my TV to component video input, switch my DDP to optical input, and switch my receiver to component video input, which is kind of complicated, but especially considering I own a whopping, I think, 3 D-Theater tapes for that VCR. I mean, it'll play any VHS tape, but I only have 3 that utilize that Dolby Digital audio and that high definition component video output. The component video output actually is used from every tape that I play, but it's not, it's not sending out it's not sending out high definition except on those 3 tapes. And those 3 tapes, I've got the ring. It's still sealed. I still haven't watched that copy. I'm just waiting for the right time to bust the seal on that. I'm seeing more little urban bunnies. Waiting for the right time to bust the seal on that. But the 2 that I have that I've watched several times, and one of them I've watched a lot. I've got Meet the Parents, or is it Meet the Fuckers? I think it's Meet the Parents. I've got one of them on probably Meet the Parents on D-Theater. And I've watched that a few times. That's a very entertaining movie. Ben Stiller. But the one that I have that I've watched like many times, like every time I want to kind of show off that VCR, or just I want to watch the movie again, it's one of those movies like I just watch over and over, is Galaxy Quest. So yeah, Galaxy Quest on D-Theater with Dolby Digital surround off a VHS tape. Yeah, 1080i. It's pretty. And then of course my TV upscales it from 1080i to 4K. So kind of an interesting mixture of technologies, and it works great. Anyway, I wasn't planning on doing this walk and talking about my Yamaha components, but here we are. I totally forget how I got sidetracked on that, but I'm at my bank. I need to move some funds around. But wow, and I wasted 30 minutes doing this. I'm overachieving tonight. What can I say? I really don't want to be at home.